Okay, sorry, Sharon. We came together and we talked about what an age-friendly community was from the World Health Organization's perspective, and that's 8 categories of an age-friendly community. And they are outdoor spaces and buildings, social participation, transportation, housing, respect and social inclusion, communication and information, civic participation and employment, and community support and health. So when we talked about this group that came together in Yarmouth felt very strongly that Yarmouth should focus on an intergenerational project. They thought that these categories had something in common for our seniors as well as our middle-aged people and our very young people. So that's the journey we took. Currently, support backbone development to sustain an age-friendly community, to make sure all of our committees and planning are inclusive of these 8 categories. Support and develop innovative caregiving and caregiver educational outreach solutions, which is why you all are here today, because we are so honored to have Ai-jen Hu here to talk about this topic. And then the last thing we plan to do is to facilitate housing and transportation summits, which are the best practices we can find in the nation to come forward to help us on Cape Cod for Yarmouth to deliver those things in affordable manners for our people. So this was all funded by the Tufts Foundation, which was a wonderful gift to this community. It's unfortunate that Nora couldn't be with us today, but we hope to continue with Tufts and receive funding for year 2. But for a small community like Yarmouth, to get outside funding to proceed on a project like this and then have international and national support from our colleagues all the way over in China, and then our national best-selling author, Ai-jen Hu, is quite an honor for this little town and for all of us. I would like to introduce Jane Kane, and she will bring forward our panelists and start the show.
Good afternoon. I'm Jane Kane. I'm the library director here for the town of Yarmouth, and I'm delighted to have everyone here to visit us this afternoon. Welcome to Ai-jen and her entourage, as they call themselves. Some of the staff. Oh. I'm usually pretty loud. Ai-jen is the author of Age of Dignity, Preparing for the Elder Boom in a Changing America. Ai-jen Hu presents bold solutions that can help us better care for our loved ones as they age and create good jobs in the process. Today we will hear her ideas and think about solutions to address the problems with today's caregiving landscape. Ai-jen is the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, co-director of Caring Across Generations. She began organizing immigrant women nearly 20 years ago, workers who needed her help. In 2000, she co-founded United, the New York organization that spearheaded the successful passage of the state's historic domestic workers' Bill of Rights. That was in 2010. Together with 11 other organizations, DWU launched the National Domestic Workers Alliance in 2007. After noticing an increase in the number of domestic workers originally hired as nannies and housekeepers who were being asked to provide home care for their employers' aging relatives, Ai-jen co-led the launch of Caring Across Generations campaign in 2011 to ensure access to affordable care for the nation's aging population and access to quality jobs for the caregiving workforce. She serves on the board of directors of Moms Rising, National Jobs with Justice, and Working America. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, Time Magazine, CNN.com. She's a 2014 MacArthur Fellow. She's a 2013 World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. She was named one of Time Magazine's 100 of the world's most influential people in 2012. Ai-jen is one of Fortune.com's world's 50 greatest leaders, and she is our featured guest today. We'll have Ai-jen provide a little talk in her short video, And then after that, I'll introduce you to the panel of folks who are here to talk with us today.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks so much to Jane and to Jan and to all the wonderful people who worked so hard to bring me and my team and the Caring Across Generations message to Yarmouth. We're so thrilled to also very excited that Jane's wonderful son Matthew works with us on the Caring Across Generations campaign. So it's all in the family here. So my name is Ai-jen Pu, and my team and I are building a movement to transform caregiving in America. And this is one of these issues that affects so many people, and yet it is so rarely a part of the public conversation and debate about policy and about solutions that we need for the future. And yet it is so universal. And so just to get us started in terms of grounding it in our own personal experiences, I'd love for us to take a couple of minutes and just share with one another here in this room. Many of you already probably know one another, but you may not know one another's care stories. So I was hoping that you could just take a couple of minutes and turn to the person sitting next to you and just share a story about someone in your life who's cared for you and the value of that relationship in your life. 2 minutes. Excellent. It really is true that everyone has a story. That I haven't been to a single room in this country where there hasn't been a story that everyone has to share, which is really, really powerful. Thank you for sharing your stories. I thought I'd start by sharing a little bit of mine. I come from an immigrant family and had the great gift of growing up with my grandparents, very involved in my life. And it was I can't quite imagine. Also very excited that Jane's wonderful son Matthew works with us. They cared for us, they laughed with us, they taught us important lessons about values and life. From my grandmother, I got my optimism, my faith that positive change is always possible, and she said, learn from the past, stay in the present, and prepare for the future. So I have to think about that as I go about my life. My grandmother also potty trained me, which I was very appreciative of. It's turned out to be quite useful. And she also taught me how to cook, although that one was still very much a work in progress. From my grandfather, I learned hard work and discipline. He was a lifelong practitioner of Tai Chi. And later in life, he became an instructor. And I remember growing up watching him practice from my bedroom window every morning, very early in the morning, with a tremendous amount of focus and discipline. And just share a story. We also used to watch Wheel of Fortune together every night. That was our show. Two extraordinary people on different sides of my family. My mother's mother and my father's father. But both very similar life stories of having survived poverty in rural China, war, migration, hard work, raising families. And then later in life, their stories begin to diverge. My grandfather lived a very long life, and then when he turned 90, he started losing his vision. And then very quickly, some of his other functions, and my father could no longer care for him and had to place him in a nursing home against his wishes. And I remember the experience of visiting him there. It truly does stay with me every day. He was in a room with about half a dozen other people, and half of them were in a tremendous amount of discomfort and pain. It was very clear. And then the other half were completely still and unmoving. And my grandfather had not slept or eaten for many days. He was incredibly afraid and begged me to take him from there. And I remember thinking that he's not going to last in this facility, and he passed away after just 3 months. Now, on the other hand, my maternal grandmother is still with us. She just turned 90 last month. And she lives independently in her own apartment that she used to share with my grandfather in Southern California in the San Gabriel Valley. And she's very active. She's still, in Dr. Atul Gawande's words, the author of her own story. She goes to church twice a week. That's her singing in the church senior choir last Thanksgiving. She plays mahjong with her friends and sometimes with me. She'll let me win about once a year, usually on my birthday. But she's very active, and despite becoming increasingly more frail, she's able to still live well, which means a tremendous amount to me and my family. That she, after caring for so many of us, is still able to be the author of her own story. So 2 grandparents, both dearly loved by their family. What made the difference in their stories? It comes down to one very important person, and her name is Mrs. Sun. She is my grandmother's caregiver and comes now every afternoon to help my grandmother with the things that have become more difficult over time. Things like cleaning, lifting, shopping, making sure my grandmother gets to appointments and has everything in the right order in her house. Mrs. Sun is in her 60s. She's also an immigrant from China and has become a really key part of my family's care team. My mom, who is also in her 60s, does a lot for my grandmother, but she lives very far away, has her own job, has lots of other people to care for, and none of us can quite imagine what we would do without Mrs. Sun. Mrs. Sun and her own family of 2 grown sons and her husband have become really an extension of our family. None of us can imagine what we would do without her and her whole family. And like so many families with older relatives, my family we didn't have a plan. And that plan proved devastating in the case of my grandfather. And in the case of my grandmother, I feel we were just very fortunate to find Mrs. Sun. We could have easily not. And it feels like it is too important of a matter to not have a plan around. And I've only realized that now after kind of experiencing what happened with my grandfather and also my grandmother. But what I realized is that most families, like ours, do not have a plan. And looking around, not only do families not have a plan, but we as a country don't quite have a plan for how we're going to care for our loved ones. And that absence of a plan is creating so much stress and tension and huge financial crises for millions of families around the country. Whether you're a family caregiver and you're overstretched trying to work a full-time job and spend more than 20 hours a week caring for a family member, or you're a professional caregiver and there's a tremendous amount of stress there that I'm going to talk about, or you're struggling to afford the care you need or find the right option in your community, it's actually not working for anyone. That absence of a plan is creating a quiet but growing crisis for millions and millions of us. And while we generally blame ourselves, it seems like there's something, we generally think maybe it's my fault. I should have done something differently. I'm a bad son, bad daughter, not organized enough, didn't think about this soon enough. But when there's so many of us for whom this is not working, it feels like there's a more fundamental problem here, that there's a design flaw, a fundamental design flaw in the way our system has set up or has failed to be set up. And in our society and our economy, perhaps one of the fundamental elements that matters most, which is how we're going to care for the people who matter most in our lives, has been completely undervalued and made invisible. And it's gotten to the point where we as families and as communities simply cannot afford not to have a plan. Because as many of us in this room know, we are undergoing a tremendous demographic shift in this country, where every 8 seconds, someone turns 70. That's 10,000 people per day, 4 million people per year turning 70 in America. By the end of 2016, 4 million of us will have reached retirement age and beyond, and advances in healthcare and technology have allowed for us to live more than 20 years longer than we had in the 1930s, which is a potentially really good thing. It means that people in my grandmother's demographic are the fastest growing demographic in our entire population. The combined effect is often called any number of natural disasters, the silver tsunami, the gray revolution, but actually we prefer the term elder boom because we believe that it's full of opportunity. Regardless of what you call it, what it means is that we will need a tremendous amount of care. And no longer can we assume that someone, usually a younger woman in our family, will be home to care for our loved ones. Most adult age working people in this country are actually working in the workforce. And that means that more than 43 million of us are struggling to work while caring for family with very little support financially or otherwise. So at a time when we need more care than ever before, we actually have less of it. So then maybe the solution is simple, that we should just have lots more Mrs. Sons step into the picture. But there's another challenge, which is that the caregiving workforce we're counting on to support us, people like Mrs. Sun, can barely sustain in their jobs. It's the kind of job that's not even considered a real job. It's often called help or companionship, and we're still fighting for basic inclusion and labor protections. Wages are so low that the workforce that we're counting on to care for us can't even care for their own families. Women like Mirla Baldonado, who is a caregiver in the Chicago area, who's introduced the Filipino cuisine to probably more than 24 Midwestern families. She's incredibly proud of her work as a caregiver and supporting the independence and dignity of others. But for this work that she loves, she takes home between $7 and $9 per hour. And with that, she stretches to support 5 children in the Philippines. We can do better than this in America. We must do better than this in America. And this is where the opportunity lies. We can and we must seize upon this moment of tremendous demographic change to once and for all put into place the kinds of systems and infrastructure and solutions that we've always needed to take care of one another. It's an opportunity to create a whole new system to care for our families and care for the workforce too. We need what I call in my book a care grid, a new grid of infrastructure that supports caregiving, like the infrastructure that once brought water and electricity, maybe someday the internet, to every home in America. We now need a care grid to bring nurturing and sustainable care options to every home in this country. And the great news is that we are making progress. Thanks to the leadership of President Obama, caregivers around the country, we've brought 2 million home care workers under minimum wage and overtime protections for the first time since labor laws were put into place in the 1930s. It just went into effect. This change just went into effect last October after more than 20 years of advocacy. And communities around the country, like Yarmouth, are creating incredibly innovative solutions. Wonderful initiatives like the Age-Friendly Communities initiatives, in addition to villages, right, the village movement, and digital caregiving time banks naturally occurring retirement communities. There's so many ways in which communities are coming together and with creativity and care, creating models of the types of solutions, the seeds of what's possible for the future, and what a strong caregiving infrastructure could support to scale. But this issue, even though we're gaining momentum, this issue is sort of just below the surface of our public imagination and dialogue. And that is a big challenge that is on us to transform. This is our moment to take caregiving, to take the conversation about caregiving. It has historically been one that we've had at the kitchen table, in the bedroom, behind closed doors, into the national public conversation about the future of this country and the public policies we need to sustain working families for the future. Now, I can't think of another issue that is so universally experienced in this country. There are at least 100 million people who are directly affected by the need for care, between family caregivers, professional caregivers, people living in multi-generational households, people in need of assistance. That is a powerful force for change, if I've ever heard of one. Powerful enough to take this national challenge, which we've all been challenged by, and create a really robust national solution. At Caring Across Generations, that is what we're up to. We're building a national movement to awaken a caring majority force in this country, a caring majority movement in this country, to create the kind of care infrastructure we're going to need for the 21st century, and to turn this challenge into the opportunity that it truly is. Now, without a doubt, there will be enormous challenges ahead of us, and there are some pretty extreme cultural barriers, which I'm hoping the panel will get into afterwards. Our fear of aging and our failure to recognize the work of care and the value of it. And there are policy barriers as well. We don't even have much of a system to build upon. The biggest myth out there is that Medicare will pay for long-term care. A lot of people assume that. But it doesn't. And right now, our only options are to completely deplete your assets and get on Medicaid, or to purchase expensive long-term care insurance, which is oftentimes not able to cover what you need when you need it. And in fact, I'm hearing that many insurance companies are getting out of the long-term care insurance market because of so many problems with the model. And that's it. Medicaid was never meant to be a long-term care program or a care infrastructure, and it's being used that way by default. So we need new policy solutions. Long-term, we believe we need to be talking about universal long-term care. Like what we're working on in the great state of Hawaii, the Aloha State, where we're on the verge of creating the first long-term care social insurance fund in the country that would universally cover families for up to 365 days of long-term care. So it's not going to solve all problems, but it'll be a huge support, especially to family caregivers who are struggling to afford and gain access to respite care. So really exciting breakthrough, and many states are looking at the Hawaii model to see what might be possible in their states as well. And each of us can take initiative to create the kind of caring culture that will usher in these kinds of policy solutions, by recognizing and supporting the professionalism of the workforce, and by supporting all of our family caregivers in the community, planning together as families, as communities, and as a country. When my book first came out, we invited people to take the conversation to their dinner tables and start the conversation from a place of planning, not during a time of crisis, but think about two very simple questions. How can we as a family begin to plan for our future caregiving needs? And what do we imagine could be the joys of planning together and caring for one another? And what we found in the report backs from those conversations is that care really is a place where our stories come together. And if we're to truly care for all who will need care in this country, it's going to take all of us. My mom, Mrs. Sun, my grandmother, Mirla, me, immigrant, non-immigrant, younger, older, all of us will have to be a part of the solution. And that is a huge opportunity to bring us together as a country. At the recent White House Conference on Aging, David Hyde Pierce opened the caregiving panel with the simple phrase, "We must remember, to age is to live, and to care is to be human." And I thought, what more simple and perfect way to capture the fact that care does connect us to our most universal and basic needs as humanity, and coming together to bring value and dignity to those relationships can truly help to bring out the best in who we are as a country and in our communities. But it is up to us to make it so. And that is what I'm hoping we can begin today's conversation with, about what it will look like in Yarmouth and all over the country to make it so. Thank you so much.
You are a wonderful, joyful, loving person.
You are like a father figure to me.
You are just gentle.
We care about each other, and we take an interest in each other.
Before I came to this country, I was taking care of my grandmother. So I felt that I can do the job.
I took it for granted that, if I wanted to do anything, I would get up, go out shopping, visiting people. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case.
I noticed you were changing years ago.
After I been able to get you to go outside, I got the opportunity then to go places with you.
When I got home from rehab after being away for over 3 months, the first thing I saw were 8 balloons that you had put up around my door, welcoming me back. And I knew I was truly home.
I am totally honored to be a caregiver for you. It is a great privilege and a joy for me.
There are so many things that I still can't do that I depend on you to help me. And the help is given so freely and with so much love, and that makes me feel a lot better and still independent, but as I said, independent with benefits.
We are not only just caregivers, you are a nutritionist, you are a nurse, you're the doctor.
You are my mother, Julie Davis, and you are loved by a whole lot of people.
You're Dr. Morris Steiner. You are my patient. You're a pediatrician, war veteran. You have taught me things that I know would take me through the rest of my life.
You are my community, but you're even more than that. You are my friends. And as much as you've done for me, there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you also.
That was quite moving. I'm going to introduce the panel members now. On today's panel, Ralph Menconi is a family caregiver. He has had a home in Yarmouth Port since 1977 and retired full-time to Cape Cod in 2014 from a career in education. He was a teacher, English department chair, advisor, coach, and summer school head, drama director during 43 years at the Salisbury School in Salisbury, Connecticut. Ralph is vice president of the Historical Society of Old Yarmouth and program chair at the Yarmouth Port Library. He volunteers at the Edward Gorey Museum here in town and has served on the board of the Yarmouth New Church Preservation Foundation. As a home caregiver, Ralph has had responsibility for an elderly relative for 10 years, both in Connecticut and now on the Cape. Ralph has coordinated care with the Visiting Nurses Association, Elder Services, Meals on Wheels, and several rehab facilities in Connecticut and in Massachusetts. He's an avid reader and has been a writer for various magazines and newspapers over the years. Ralph, thank you for sharing your personal story, and in your participation you can highlight the difficulties of balancing career and family, including some financial issues. Rosa Maria Pimenta is a caregiver and advocate. She studied visual arts in Sao Paulo. She was born in Minas Gerais in the southeastern part of Brazil. She's worked on Cape Cod as a nursing assistant, both in the rehab area at Pleasant Bay in Orleans and in private home care since she came to the Cape from Brazil 17 years ago, now 18, Before emigrating as a single parent with her daughter Nayana, she worked as an art educator for students from preschool through high school. She's volunteered in programs involving music, free dance, visual arts, literature, and drama. Now she studies cello, she sings in a church choir, and she's a member of the Chatham Chorale. Rosa's dream is to bridge her art with the health of gravity as an alternative and natural form of treatment. Rosa says, art cures. Art transforms attitudes. It has magic. Art is life. Rosa, thank you for participating. Jack Moylan will be on the panel as a senior advocate. Jack lives in Yarmouth and he serves on our town finance committee. He's a regular attendee of the Yarmouth Senior Center. His resume of accomplishments includes working as an attorney, he's the former mayor of Chicopee, and a town solicitor. His personal commitment to social groups include the Knights of Columbus. He's volunteered at hospitals, athletic groups, and on banking committees. Jack is married, has 3 children, 4 grandchildren. He has managed through a major health crisis over the past few years, and it is this personal story that presents issues facing seniors in accessing the quality, affordable care they need. Hopefully, Jack can highlight some successes from his experience. And our moderator this afternoon is Bill Bogdanovich. Bill's career started when he was in high school, cleaning a hot kitchen 3 hours every day after school for about $2.50 an hour. He worked his way up through housekeeping and maintenance, and he worked as a certified nursing assistant one summer. He earned his bachelor's degree in management from Bentley College, a certificate in management and administration from Harvard University Extension, and a master's degree from Bowling Green State University. Bill first came to Cape Cod in 1986 with the intention of opening a home health agency, but he ended up getting more involved in nursing homes instead. Bill joined Liberty Commons in 1987, became its administrator, and he grew to take on other roles as that organization grew, including Director of Operations in 1989. Under Bill's leadership, Broad Reach has developed into a community of care here on Cape Cod. Broad Reach now spans 3 decades of service, which includes Liberty Commons Rehabilitation and Skilled Care Center, the Victorian Assisted Living Residence, and Broad Reach Hospice and Palliative Care. Bill is an activist in senior care on the state and national levels. He chairs the board of the Massachusetts Senior Care Association, which is the state affiliate of the American Healthcare Association. He serves on the Mass Department of Public Health's Dispute Resolution Committee, the American College of Healthcare Administrators Board, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Special Legislative Commission on Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Aging. Thank you, Bill, for your participation.
We do have it on. Technology can always be the first challenge, but hopefully not the most significant one. And we have before us this afternoon people who have faced and can help us perhaps think about different ways to face the challenges that are before us as a society in dealing with this challenge. I think I would like to open by asking our panelists to consider their sort of greatest connection to aging, whether that's been caregiving in terms of something, whether that's personal or professional. Help us understand where are you in this whole process? Sure.
Way far from technology. I'm so sorry. Could you please ask the question again?
Sure. Tell us about your greatest connection to caregiving.
It's the humanity. It's we are all in the same boat. We are humans. We have our lives. We grow. We become aged, and we think our parents. We think of our grandparents. So our heart to give to the residents, to the patients, to help the family, to go through the change as they become, as they attract any disease, sickness, or just the age. I don't know if I'm really answering the question.
You are, I think, and I would ask Ai-jen perhaps to share with us, and hearing Rosa's opening comments, it draws me to think of what you described as his son. And is everyone, or can everyone hope to be as fortunate as to have Mrs. Son? And if not, what should we think about to try and make that happen?
Okay, great. I think it's possible that we could each have a wonderful caregiver who supports us, and I think what's also very likely is that we'll each be a part of and also rely upon a care team of family caregivers, friends, neighbors, and professional caregivers, because I think we're headed into the age of care, where it's a kind of an all hands on deck situation. And I think it'll bring us closer together as communities, and I think we're going to need new systems to support that, especially a system to support the affordability of care. I think the reality is that families are really struggling financially to afford and pay for the care they need. And then the other reality is that there's no way we're going to be able to sustain this workforce that we're counting on unless we improve the quality of these jobs. And there is a very direct connection between the quality of care and the quality of these jobs. And so I think when I think about what it would take for us to get to a sustainable circle of care or care teams that we can all count on and be a part of, I think it's going to take a big investment in the workforce, in affordability, and systems that support all the different kinds of ways that caregiving is happening.
Thank you. Jack, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned your own recovery and the role that the Visiting Nurses Association played in helping make that possible. Were any of the challenges that present to the workforce anything you saw when you were on the receiving side?
Well, actually, I went to the Visiting Nurses because I was a director and president of the Chicopee Visiting Nurses for 10 years. But I found that what the Visiting Nurses asked me to do when I came back from the hospital kept me, gave me the right attitude how to recover from the surgery I had. First of all, walking became very important. The first day home from the hospital, I walked all the way down my driveway, which is about 100 feet. 2 months later, I was walking 2 miles a day. And they just kept at me to make sure I did this. They monitored my care by telephone every day, took my weight, blood pressure, pulse, and any questions I might have had, and then came in visiting maybe 3 or 4 times a week at first. And I just found that the care was excellent. Physical therapist came in a couple of times, thought I was doing so well that she said I didn't need her anymore, but made sure that I could get into the shower without falling down and doing damage to myself. So that from the time I was first diagnosed with a closing aortal valve until the time I was really walking the 2 miles, there was a lot of anxiety going on, but at the same time, it was a lot of hope that everything was going to turn out okay. And it's been almost 2 years, and I think it's turned out extremely well, and I'm very pleased with the care I had. If I could just add one outside comment. My last adventure although I still have my law degree and my law practice certificate, I don't practice anymore, but I did work at the Soldiers Home in Holyoke, which is a long-term care for veterans. And something that Asian said during her talk about what's going on in Hawaii reminded me that the care at the Soldiers Home, which I think has a very good reputation, was charging $900 a month to the veteran. That's all that it cost them. And this had no matter as to how much assets he had. And I think that it might have something to do with what you were talking about.
The challenge of paying for care is one that I certainly brought to our attention, and surely the care that Soldiers Home provides costs well in excess of that $900 a month. So I would guess that there are challenges that face us from a public policy and funding perspective along those lines as well. Ai-jen, do you see approaches to that are perhaps more effective than others in the work you're doing and in the travels you have?
In the financing the care? Yep. I do think that there's a limit to how much families are going to be able to bear in terms of the cost. And so I think that one of the roles of our public infrastructure is, when that is the case, to step in and to support. And what Hawaii is doing in terms of creating a social insurance fund is one model. It's being financed through a 0.5% increase in the sales tax. Oregon, the state of Oregon right now is considering a minor increase in the business tax that will bring $1.2 billion in new revenue into the state per year. That is all earmarked for the care economy, for child care and long-term care. So there are going to be lots of different experiments at the state level to figure out how we invest in our communities in this way and in the care that we need in this way. And I think there's a lot of openness at the moment to creative financing solutions, and I think we should put all ideas on the table, do the research, do the pilots, and see where it takes us. But I do believe we need a collectivized support, that individual families will only be able to bear so much in terms of cost, and the incredible cost that we're already bearing is done so in such inefficient and ineffective ways.
In the time that I've been responsible for the care of an elderly relative, also known as my mother, who is familiar to some of you in the audience. I can see some familiar faces out there. She is approaching 95. She and perhaps the rest of us didn't know she'd make it this far, and we're certainly glad that she has. But one thing I would say in terms of financing is that I discovered in the town of Yarmouth, and it may be true elsewhere on the Cape, that the resources that are here that we are using, which include elder services, which include VNA as needed, Meals on Wheels, and a certain degree of private pay, are made affordable. I am tremendously impressed by the attention that the Cape and particularly Yarmouth give to the elderly. Perhaps it's certainly a result of the high concentration of retired people down here, but I put it in contrast with the town in which I lived for many years in Western Connecticut. It's a wonderful town. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but there were nowhere near the resources out there that we all have for us on the Cape. And one of the ironies I found of the extremely high cost of nursing homes or senior residences, because they are prohibitively expensive. I've shopped around on the Cape, and I've found prices from $380 a day at the low end to approaching $600 a day at the high end, depending on the amount of need for the individual. But the irony there is that has caused people like myself to do more home care, because we just weren't going to get involved with selling the house and all the family jewels and everything like that. So I think that Yarmouth is doing a great job in meeting the need of this elder population and allowing people not to fall into what was called in a well-known book, you may have read, The Medicaid Trap. That was a book a few years ago, but the trap I know is out there is that you sell everything except for, what is it, $3,000 or something, and then you live your life in a senior residence. Not that they're all bad, some of them are beautiful, but it's certainly not what my mother had in mind, nor did I for her. So my hat is off to this new town that I live in here.
Panelists, I'm curious to hear your thoughts and reactions on what you might see as the biggest sort of societal shift that we need. We are a community of largely retired people, many of whom are concerned about being able to afford the taxes that they already have to pay, yet at the same time, we're also challenging ourselves to think about needing to look outside the box, to be able to do better because collectively we can, but we sometimes worry about how we're doing it ourselves on a fixed income in retirement. So how should we be thinking about that in our society here today on the Cape?
I'll take a shot. Well, you know, that being on the finance committee in the town, I can tell you right now that funds in the town of Yarmouth are pretty restricted. We, every time you come up with something that's going to cause an increase in taxes, you might as well talk to the wind because you're not going to get it. You know, right now the town is facing a very, very serious expense in improving the septic system and by putting in sewers. And even though there's a plan on paper right now to put it in without a large burden on the tax rate, it's also being given the nomenclature of a 55-year plan so that a lot of us won't have to worry about it. But right now, you know, I think whatever the town can do, I think they're willing to participate in doing what they can for the seniors. And I know that the senior programs that the senior center has put forward are getting a lot of support from our finance committee, not just from me, but from the whole committee. We just feel that they're doing a great job here, and if we can help out in some other way, we'll certainly give it a shot.
I think there are also some ways to redirect where we're currently spending resources towards home care. And for example, I think the work that Rosa does is really undervalued in a lot of ways. And if we were to really see workers like Rosa as a huge part of the healthcare solution for the future, we could ultimately save the healthcare system a tremendous amount of money. There's about $1 trillion in waste in our healthcare system every year. And if we redirected even a small, even 20% of that towards improving access to home care and home care worker wages, I think we could. And some of that waste comes from poor management of chronic illnesses, yeah, right? And from unnecessary emergency room visits and readmittances and things that good caregiving addresses and prevents, right? So if we think about the question of cost more holistically, I think we can look and we invest in our family caregivers and our professional caregivers through things like training, right, and wages and respite care. We can actually start to look at a long-term arc where we actually become much more efficient and save billions of dollars in cost in the healthcare system.
Let me follow up, Lysan, with a question on, in Massachusetts right now there has been legislation put forth that would address the living wage. And one of the permutations of that right now is to set a living wage, start wage, minimum wage, but for a segment of that worker population that limits it to your fast food, big box store employee. One of the concerns that's been expressed about that is that that could cut out the frontline healthcare worker, and in essence place a greater value on the fast food worker or the Walmart greeter, if you will. So as we perhaps in our own in our own state right now hear proposals like that debated. Does that give you concern, or do you think it's a beginning and one that we can hope to be able to hitch our wagon to, if you will, in the future?
You mean there's an exclusion of direct care workers in the minimum wage proposal?
The minimum wage proposal is limited to big box stores
Ah, I
and
see.
fast food workers.
I see.
I think on the presumption that those kinds of large corporate entities can afford it, so we should make them because we know they can. But it doesn't require that we face some of the challenges of financing that in other ways.
Right. I think that this is a moment where we can't afford not to raise the minimum wage for direct care workers and the frontline healthcare workers that you talk about. When we look at the need, right, alone, right now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that the personal care aide and home care worker is the fastest growing occupation in our entire economy. And it's projected to grow at 5 times the rate of any other occupation. And by the year 2030, caregiving will be the largest single occupation in our entire economy. So if we actually want to address inequality, if we want to create economic security, not just in terms of our field of caregiving that we all care so much about, but in our entire economy, we've got to figure out how these jobs become good jobs that you can take pride in and support your family on. I mean, it is not a choice to finance or not finance. We've just got to do it. Otherwise, a huge percentage of our workforce will be working harder than ever before and still living in poverty, and that will create so many other instabilities for us.
Yeah, come on.
Rose? Like a toast. Rose, go ahead.
Sorry, a little nervous about this. I think so. I think because we have to live, right? So I think it'll make it easier for a worker to come up and go to work and to give their love, their soul, their compassion, and without worries financially, and taking their kids to school. So I think it makes the whole picture much easier in working. Well, first of all, anything you do in life, you have to do it with love. And I believe, like, if you don't love what you do, or if you cannot do what you love to do what you are doing with love. That's the way I started working as a CNA. When I grew up in Brazil dreaming about becoming an artist, but I believe that it wasn't really a secure way to live by what we read, what we hear about artists in general. So I worked in school educational field in Brazil, but when I came to the United States, it's like the whole picture, the whole image becomes like a panic, a disaster, a nightmare, because when you think about the language, even though if you learn the language in your country, you come to work and live in a different country, what you learned, what you think you know, it just becomes like, it makes you think that you know nothing. So when I started working here, I worked as a housekeeping for about 6 months, then I was ready to quit and to go back to my educational field in my country. And because to become an artist, here it became like a very, like a big obstacle to go to school, to get your license to do what you love to do. So, but even though doing housekeeping in a nursing home, the same nursing home, Pleasant Bay, that I work today, I did with all my love. In each room that I did, it was like doing my kitchen, my home. And but I wasn't seeing progress, and I knew I could do more for the residents, for the patients. But I decided to quit. And then I was invited to go to school for nursing assistant, and the administrators, they said, maybe a nurse, we want you here, we don't want to lose you, don't go back to Brazil now. So I went to school for CNA, for nursing assistant, and I enjoyed the whole course, and as a student I was working as a caregiver at the same nursing home. And so I started working in a long-term. I worked for about 3 months. I always saw the job as a huge responsibility to work, especially, it's not just for working with a human being, working I replaced always all the residents as my parents, my grandparents, or my future, or my siblings. So I really gave my soul to work in the long term, but it was depressing, it was sad, and of course the financial, it became like working many, many hours to be able to keep going, to live. And it was depressing in a way, thinking about my parents that I left in my country and giving all my soul to the residents and all my compassion and working with love. So at 3 months working a long term, I decided that it wasn't really what I needed. I needed seeing progress. I need to see. So I was there helping in family members and the residents to wait for the day. And that really emotionally took me a lot. So I decided I talked with them and I said, I really love what I do, but it's really taking my soul, it's taking I get home. I love for the happiness that I was able to provide for the residents, but it's still like I still need more. I need to see progress. I need to see them not decline, only declining. So they changed me to the rehab unit, and there I found myself helping the patients coming in and getting them back to their feet, that helping them to be themselves and encourage them to believe that they are going to be doing what they were doing, and helping them to go home. And that was just my field, where I found in geriatric field and working in a nursing home as a caregiver. And I'm still there, and I hope I answered.
We're very clearly lucky that we did not go back to Brazil.
What Rosa said so well, I think it represents or reminds me of what I've seen in so many of the individuals. We actually have one named Rosa who comes to our house. She said she might sneak in on the way home from work today, but I don't know if she's in the back row there somewhere. But the dedication that people like you bring And as you said, love is tremendously important in the success. Now, in my view, as one who's participated in this for a while, I think that that term that Jen quoted, the village approach, is the way to go in this country. In the time I've been aware of elder care, Senator Edward Kennedy proposed a national health program back in the 1980s. It failed because of the expense. Hillary Clinton, when she was First Lady, she's calling it now Hillary Care, and it was called that back in the 1990s. That didn't make it. Currently, we do have a successful plan, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. But from what I've seen, there isn't an awful lot for the elderly in any of these plans. It's directed towards other parts of the population. And so I think when a town like Yarmouth, as I said before, coordinates elder care, that's where the success is, rather than huge, very expensive national plans influenced by politics, influenced by budget constraints, large segments of the population, competition. I think it's the village approach that Jen mentioned that I see the future success, and people like the fine woman on my left being part of that village, definitely.
Most definitely. I believe it was another famous Massachusetts politician who referenced all politics being local. Jen, one of the things that I think many face challenges with are those of what we've come to call the sandwich generation. And perhaps some in the audience here are worried about whether they're a slice of the bread or something in the middle, but their challenges in that are there for both. Your thoughts on that?
We've come to call it the panini effect. Because everybody's getting squeezed, even the bread. Right? And I definitely think that this is it. I mean, we're looking at a situation where every single generation is under the pressure or feeling the pressure of our failure to have real supports for caregivers. Even now, millennials are starting to turn 35, and many of them are having children. And again, right, there's very little support in the way of childcare. And some of those millennials, their grandparents are still around, and they're playing a role in the care of their grandparents, right? So we have more and more generations who are figuring out different ways of caring for each other with so little support, and everybody's feeling the pressure. So I think we're all being sandwiched in different ways, and that's why we think it's so important to not only support family caregivers and professional caregivers, but how we think about how we're creating villages of support. So everybody, well, Rosalind Carter, former First Lady, said there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: people who are caregivers or will be caregivers, people who need care or will need care. And so if that's the case, then our village model really does need to look at everybody as part of the solution. And the more we have that approach, I think, to the situation, I think the less squeeze, the less of us will be in the panini machine. We'll be able to liberate ourselves from the panini.
Thank you. Any panelists' thoughts on the challenges that you see in our communities for people in that way?
Well, the challenges I face deal in 2 areas that I made some notes on in preparation for coming over here. There is a lot of bureaucracy in the system, I find. Trying to, get something set up with various levels of administration. We have a team leader, we have a case manager, we have a scheduler, and we needed a nurse, one nurse to discharge my mother from VNA, who came on one day, and then the next day another nurse came from Elder Services to admit her to Elder Services. And I didn't think that was the most efficient way. So I think money could be saved, or efficiency could be increased by addressing the bureaucracy. And the second thing I'd mention quickly is I think communication can be improved, particularly for the family caregiver, which I am, and those who are responsible for her care. I've heard email communication, for example, is out. Can't use that, which I do understand. As someone who's been in school administration, you don't want to convey confidential information over emails, but even something like, Rosa's coming at 9:30 instead of 9:15, that can't be put in electronic communication. It has to be phoned. And if you're not there to get the message, you don't get it as a voicemail. You just say, somebody called, you better call back, and then you call back, and it's after hours. So I think, I'm very pleased with the care we're getting. I'm not arguing with that, but I do think study of the bureaucratic aspects and making the communication also more efficient would be two frustrations that I deal with.
Thank you. Arjun, from the communication point is one where, when you talk about the inefficiencies, I bet many in the room could come up with a story similar to Ralph's. But another key aspect of communication is the role of good decision-making. And I flagged a page in the book where you talked about one of the challenges is that the healthcare system measures success in a way that isn't always consistent with what the individual wants in terms of aggressiveness of treatment, but to what end and for what sake. Could you share some thoughts on that with us?
There's a wonderful book that really does a great job talking about this very issue in depth. It's called Being Mortal by Dr. Atul Gawande. It's a stunning, beautiful book, and he does really talk about that. That so much of healthcare is about delay of death as opposed to life and quality of life, and what it means for people to, that question of being the author of your own story is such an important part of quality of life. And our healthcare system just is not set up that way. It's the DNA of it is really structured towards aggressive treatments, delay of death at all cost. And that is something that I think books like Being Mortal really help us take a look at, and I hope they catalyze a culture change in the healthcare system. I really do. I think we have to rehumanize healthcare.
It's its roots do go back to not just science, but art and science. And that's a message that is probably one worth trying to take as we think about it further today. I'd like to take a few minutes to also open the floor up to questions. Kathy tells me we have the ability to entertain those. So we'll start at the back of the room, because the gentleman on my far right.
decade of caring for our parents, all of whom have passed away now in the past decade, and went through arranging for, from home, in the case of my parents, to assisted living, from assisted living, getting in home health care, from home health care into live-in, to convalescent homes. And one thing that I found appalling throughout was the total lack of consumer education. It was spending hundreds and hundreds of hours looking at trying to find what was a quality assisted living facility, what's a quality convalescent facility, what's a good home health care agency. When it comes to the aides, how much is the home health care agency taking off the top and leaving what minuscule amount to the aides that are doing that work on a daily basis? And while there are, I can see the germination of some consumer information out there in terms of reporting, in terms of how one goes about finding that. Can you explain at all where that process is to help us all going through this nightmarish process? It's really a nightmarish process. And when you have a failure after failure of, say, with one agency with aides that are utterly horrific, and going to another agency and totally unsure whether that's going to be any better, other than perhaps by word of mouth.
So I think his question is around communication, information, and bureaucracy. Does that sound right?
I bet our moderator has some good thoughts on this question.
She's at the fire and you can tape. Can you hear me? All right. It's a good thing I don't have my glasses problem on today, else we'd all be in trouble. There are great difficulties with how to get the best information that you can really rely on, and I think when you throw uncertainty into the mix of these challenging situations, it makes every turn one that you don't know what you'll find when you go around it. So I think a key thing that goes to the idea that Ai-jen suggested early on is the value of a plan. And you don't have to know exactly what you're going to do, but you might want to know where to look for the information that you're going to need to help you make the decision at the time. So learn what those resources are before you have a critical need for them. It would probably behoove us to mention while we're sitting in the senior center that in each town, the agencies and organizations like this can often be a very critical first step and first place. The value of your friends and neighbors' experience, though, is where you could start to make sure you've also pulled in the village. So knowing and not being afraid to ask and make sure that you remember, because when the time comes, it becomes all the more difficult to do that. Those are all areas that I think can help take some of the mystery and fear out of that situation.
I also really want to just shout out all gerontologists and social workers and people who are working in this field, this new emerging field called care management. Really important roles that are developing in the social work field and in the gerontology field to help families navigate the whole system. And I've been speaking at college campuses more because I'm trying to encourage more young people to go into fields related to gerontology and geriatrics and social work that are about supporting families around their caregiving needs. And I'm finding that a lot of young people are very much interested in this, which is very hopeful. But I think part of the corollary effect of the kind of ageism that we have in the society is the fact that these fields have been so undervalued for so long. And now we're really feeling the brunt of that. And I think the problem that the gentleman just raised in terms of how chaotic and disaggregated everything is and how few resources there are to really streamline and understand what solutions are out there has to do with our just underinvestment in this entire field. So people like Jan and others who've done this work for their whole lives, we just need like an army of Jans for the future.
There was another question in the middle here, yeah?
Bill, I'll just build on what you said. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we do have a council on aging in every town, and that's a great portal for referring, a great place to begin, the center to get your information, and the community linkages to build a village. I think that was an excellent point for the Commonwealth that is unique to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Hi, Jen. At one point you mentioned waste in the system, and that so many trillions or billions of dollars of waste was there, and that would be a method of financing this. I think everybody has a question, who's going to pay for it, how are we going to pay for it? Can you be any more specific as to what that waste actually is? What does it consist of?
Well, 70% of the costs in our healthcare system are concentrated around end of life. And a lot of the costs have to do with hospital readmittances because of poor management of medication or putting people into situations where they're not getting the right care and their diets and other things are not being managed properly. A lot of actually resources are going into the Medicaid, the nursing home system. A number of states still haven't rebalanced their Medicaid systems towards home and community-based services, so paying a lot more for institution-based care and could save a ton of money in their Medicaid systems even for home care, right? That's how we got the state of Ohio to shift $150 million in its Medicaid budget towards home and community-based services. When we saw the numbers around how much money you would save and the different outcomes that you would get through really investing in home care, it was not difficult to make that argument, even in a state that is much more conservative than Massachusetts. So there's that. And I am not a healthcare expert, but I think there are others in the room who could say more specifics about the kinds of inefficiencies in end-of-life healthcare. But my sense is that the experts that I've talked to in the healthcare field and also in healthcare companies have said that they think that the costs could be reduced by at least 20 to 30% if we really invest in caregiving.
Build on that one question. There's some excellent research that McKinsey has done, which certifies those types of numbers, as well as the Dartmouth Atlas project, which is out of Dartmouth University. Both indicate that a significant amount of the expense that we have today is potentially saved through better use of care managers as opposed to physicians and hospitals.
We are not the first society to face this great tsunami. Japan is already at 20% over 65 and has been for quite a while. How are they dealing with their elderly population?
They're frankly really struggling with it. They do have long-term care for families, but they actually have a shortage of professional care workers. So they're trying to figure out how to manage that shortage and have done everything from create caregiving time banks where you can provide a few hours of service for your neighbor, maybe bring groceries, cook a few meals, help clean, and then you can bank those hours and those services and cash in on them for your mother who lives on the other side of the country. So those kind of time banking systems. And they're also building caregiving robots. I know. So, you know, they're really trying multiple routes of trying to figure this out. But one thing to note is, you know, they haven't adequately valued this role of family caregiver or professional caregiver, and now they're in a big bind around it. So let's actually look at that and learn from that here. And wouldn't it be amazing if the United States was on the forefront globally of really supporting a strong caregiving workforce and really investing in that incredibly valuable part of our communities?
Yes.
Want to talk about baby boomers. Those born between 1946 and 1964, aging, and nursing homes. I'm very pessimistic about nursing homes in this country. And I can speak from having lived in 2 nursing homes for most of last year and part of this year. I'm actually fearful of nursing homes. They're short-handed. You don't very often get care by a nurse. I love to see RNs. I love registered nurses. I even love LPNs. But most of your care in nursing homes, the place of last resort, and some people don't have homes for caregiving. They don't have a home. They're the ones that end up in nursing homes. Most of your care is done by aides, who are the least skilled. They're not RNs. They're not LPNs. They're the least, and you get most of your care from aides, and you very rarely see a doctor. I had to call the police to get an ambulance to go to the hospital where I was admitted for pancreatitis. I'm very fearful of nursing homes. I'm very pessimistic. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially in the age of baby boomers.
Great. Kathy, is there time for one more? Do we have time for one more? Jen has a tight schedule, and then we have a reception in the other room and some lovely music, so.
One more then, sure.
One, and that's it. Hi, my name is Brenda Vasquez. I'm a gerontologist, USC trained, but I live on the Cape. I live in Brewster, and I'm very involved here with our community. I travel throughout the Cape in my role as the chair of our Community Health Network of Cape and Islands, also working on a variety of studies across the Cape with the University of Massachusetts, the Gerontology Institute, and really having an opportunity to look at all the information that we're gathering from various towns, all those councils on aging, from Provincetown, to the very tip of the bridge. And what I see now, this is very exciting that you're here. I think that we need this inspiration, and I just really appreciate your articulate way of expressing the needs that we have in caregiving. I came from a meeting this morning, and one of the things that we talked about was, where are we going to house the caregivers? Where are we going to put people here? We have zoning laws that don't allow us to do certain things structurally to enable a workforce to grow and develop here. So one of the things I've appreciated about coming back home is how active and civically engaged we can be. State Prevention and Wellness Trust Fund is
finding ways to lower those chronic conditions and the cost of managing those so that maybe we can find a release of funds to invest into this workforce. But like you said, Ajen, it requires creativity, it requires us to show up at our town meetings, it requires us to be present, us to train folks, and do the kind of information sharing that is necessary so that citizens can make informed decisions and have an impact on the policies that affect their lives. So I just want to leave it on a positive note. Positive change is possible, and I think that we can all do it together. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our